Yeah, it's Miss Lida, yes, sir. Wala, kunin mo na siya. Sabihan mo na siya.
The Necrological Service in honor of the late Senator Leticia Ramos Shahani is hereby declared open.
Okay. Please rise for the Lord's Prayer to be sung by the Senate Choir. After the doxology, please remain standing for the singing of the Philippine National Anthem. Kindly be seated. The Honorable Aquilino Nene Q. Pimentel Jr. will now deliver his eulogy.
When people talk about women heroes of the Philippines, invariably the conversation would focus on those who were engaged either directly or indirectly in warlike activities against the occupying armies of the enemy, whoever they might be at that particular moment of our country's history. Gabriela Silang, who lived from 1731 to 1763, is one such outstanding example. She is in fact considered a national hero, the Joan of Arc of Ilocandia, the Generala of Ilocano uprisings against the Spanish Empire. Then there was Melchora Aquino, or Tandang Sora, who did not directly bear up arms against the Spanish colonizers of the country, but she did give aid and comfort to the Filipino revolutionaries that led the Spanish authorities to arrest her and exile her to Guam. It was only when the American colonizers took over our country from Spain that she was brought back home, where she died at the unbelievable age of 104 in 1919. And in more modern times, there was Simeona Punsalan Tapang, a highly ranked female hook veteran who fought the Japanese in Central Luzon during the World War II when she was just a young adult. And in more recent times, in 1986 to be more precise, there was a Cory Aquino who successfully led millions of our people to topple down the 14-year martial law regime of President Ferdinand E. Marcos and replaced it with a government run on a democratic constitution and on the rule of law. Among the millions who helped Cory Aquino achieve her dream, become a national cause celebre, the peaceful restoration of freedom and democracy to our land, was a young Filipina, Leticia Ramos Shahani. The lady was certainly doing something out of the ordinary, and she was ready for burning by the enemies of freedom and democracy in our country. But divine providence had other plans for her, for she was helping publicly the move to oust Marcos, who had been ruling the country as his fiefdom for the last 14 years. And she was no stranger to Mr. Marcos. He was actually a second-degree cousin of the president. And since the country was then under the authoritarian rule, it was certainly no mean feat for anyone to defy the tyrant himself, and tell him in effect to face the country that the country needed a new LIDA. Moreover, the country's customs and traditions discourage acts that might be deemed as moves of ingratitude to any powerful and influential relative who could make political dreams come true. In the event, Leti Ramos Shahani not only had the determination but the pluck to land a prestigious job, and she did, like that of the United Nations Assistant Secretary General for Social Development and Humanitarian Affairs, an achievement heretofore unknown to any Filipina. And the thing is that the lady did not allow any personal considerations to stand on the way of her doing what she believed was right and just. In other words, she never gave even any impression that whatever her brother, who became president in 1992, or her cousin, who held power for several years earlier, or any other friend or relation in position of power or influence wanted, that she would just swallow it, bait, hook, line, and all. In return, the people of the country, to their credit, found it right to reward her with their votes when she ran for the Senate twice, first in 1987 and second in 1992. And in the Senate, my dear friends, Leti Ramos Shahani was a workhorse. She was a steady presence in Senate committee meetings, and she relentlessly pushed, with her now patented independence of mind, for her advocacies, especially on matters of youth and development. She later founded and became the chairperson of Budhi Foundation, and also served as chairperson of the Foundation of Youth and Development of the Philippines. I only had a passing privilege of personally knowing Senator Leti. But from what I learned of her in person, as well as from those who knew her closely, I can only say that the Senate was blessed by her selfless and dedicated presence there as a lawmaker for two terms, and so was the country. May the Lord God then give Senator Leti her just rewards to make up for our inadequacies in that regard. God bless Senator Leti Ramos Shahani, her family, her sons Ranjit and Chanda, and her daughter Leela, her other heirs, our Senate, our people, and our country. Maraming salamat po.
The Honorable Rene A. V. Sagizag will now deliver his eulogy.
To all my golden friends present this afternoon, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Ako po'y naririto dahil tumanggap ng liham sa aking kaibigan si Lutz Barbo to deliver a 7 to 10 minute eulogy. Alam po natin lahat kung anong ibig sabihin ng senatorial minute. But let me reassure you that I have a prepared text here comprising only one page. Po, kita niyo po, confirmed unrepentant yellow tard. Anyway, the Pearl of the Orient Seas has just lost another gem or jewel, radiant of purest ray serene. I had not known the one we are privileged to honor today until late December 1985. I was then the spokesperson of candidate Cory Aquino, and on December 28, 1985, it was my pleasant task to announce that a member of the administration was defecting to support Cory Aquino. Nandiyan po pala si Manong Eddie. Manong Eddie, slower. It took another 6 weeks bago tayo sinamahan. Anyway, I was to learn more about her. She had attended good schools. So far, with all due respect, the only one I have heard say this august chamber. Most any other Filipino would say august chamber. Ang accent po no, nasa second syllable. In the same manner, nandyan po si Kamandag Erap, no? Pag si Pedro, kaibigan ni Juan at Pablo, many would say, A is the mutual friend of Pedro and Pablo. Erap would be among the very few I would hear say, A is the common friend, not mutual. Dalang mutual, A and B lang. Anyway, so Manang Leti and I shared a passion for precision in expression. At kami rin ang mga dalawang senador no, na alam ko, pag humihingi ang constituents ng financial help, kung meron kaming perang na kaunti, pabibigyan ko na 50, 100, Manang Leti, le-lecturean pa yung humihingi. Kaya talagang walang mangyayari sa atin kung very paternalistic. So that was how she was. When she defected on December 28, that was when I thought our luck turned. We had a very bumpy start. We had what was described as a disastrous interview by the New York Times. Manong Leti proved to be our lucky charm. A week later, candidate, plain housewife, Cory Aquino, delivered a rousing speech in Manila Bay. And I had thought then, we had a chance. Hindi naman siguro tayo dapat magulat dahil the plain housewife was descended from the sumulong sa Rizal and the Coangcos of Tarlac with political background and married to a quintessential politician, si Ninoy. So, siya din, si Cory, nag-major sa math and minored in French, and I got convinced that our seemingly insane adventure had a chance. There was, I realized, yes, the risk of winning. Doy Laurel had sacrificed earlier, slid down to BIP, and Cory Doy barnstormed all over the country very, very well. People power with divine intervention was an inevitability. When I, a naive tyro, once walked out of the Senate very early on because my integrity was questioned by a well-meaning senator. So I took leave and went home, and Manang Leti was among the few who came over to console me and lecture me, along with Uncle Joby Salonga, Manong Bert Romulo, and Senator Raul Manglapus Cold. They were a fine bunch who told me that in public service, like what Senator Tanyada would used to tell us, we have to go through indignities in the service of the people. So my opinions should not be affected by unfair criticism. Dahil lang naging bansag sa akin po noon, ako si Senator Balat Sibuyas. Anyway, ako po yung accidental public servant who were tutored by my seniors like Manang Leti, and for that I'm more grateful than I can say. In our back row at the time, to my left was Manong Bert Romulo, sa kanan po si Manang Leti, and for the right was Manong Bobby Tanyada, Manong Bert, Central Universidad de Madrid, Manang Leti, UP, Wellesley, Columbia, Sorbonne. All of us were working our butts off for the motherland. Manang voted a critical yes on September 16, 1991 on the military bases, differing with us the so-called, depending on where you see it, either the magnificent or the malevolent 12. We remain convinced that we voted on the right side of history. When EDCA was enacted, bypassing the Senate, unlike in 1991, she joined and led us, a fellow convener of the Pilipinong nagkakaisa para soberania, Pinas, and served as our expert advocate for an independent foreign policy. She would not want us to resume being America's last plantation, nor China's new one. It could be, 7 minutes ago, dear Brutus, our default does not lie in American stars and stripes, but in ourselves, but we are underlings. So 2 things I wish you and all my students would remember, if nothing else. Number 1, never, never surrender your conscience to the state, particularly if only for a committee chairmanship. And the other thing is, I learned from Manang Leti that the only thing in life we can ever be is to be kind. So, on that note, thank you, Manang Leti, and goodbye.
The Honorable Ramon B. Magsaysay Jr. will now deliver his eulogy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mr. President. Mr. President, too many presidents here, past, present, and future. Frank, Tito. Pericles, a prominent and influential Greek statesman, orator and general of Athens during the Golden Age, once said, "What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but what is woven into the lives of others." I met Senator Leticia Ramos Shahani, Manang Leti, to many of us in 1995, as a neophyte senator, along with Senators freshman Frank Drilon, Sergio Osmeña, is Sergio around here? Greg Onasan, the late Siling Fernan, Johnny Flavier, our friend, Senator Juan Ponce Enrile, with his partner Johnny Flavier, and Miriam Defensor Santiago. I look up to her for guidance and wisdom. and I learned so much from her in the brief time I worked with her in the Senate for 3 years. It was Manang Leti, together with Senator Flavier, who served as a quorum maker in my committees of Trade of Commerce and Economic Affairs. What I remember most about her is a firm belief that, quote, poverty is not an excuse to not succeed in life. She would emphasize this in casual conversations, in plenary debates, and even more so during public hearings. In her own words, the gospel of poverty is not a hindrance to one's success. She would repeat that very often and get to prove her point. She was formidable as she was admirable. What she believed, she will pursue relentlessly and tirelessly. I have had the distinct pleasure to work with her. The inception to passage on a number of landmark legislation, particularly the Magna Carta for Small and Medium Enterprises, SMEs, and the Foreign Investments Act. Her views on diplomacy and foreign affairs were trailblazing even before the strategies of back-channeling or OFW-centered diplomacy were popularized. Senator Ramos Shahani was already using them. In fact, I invite everybody's attention to her scholarly discourse on the Philippine Passport Act, the debates on the various statutes on the migrant workers' law, and her body of work in treaties and international agreements. She introduced and led for ratification in the upper chamber. She was truly a diplomat, legislator extraordinaire. It was my membership in the Congressional Commission on Agricultural Modernization, AGRICOM, chaired by Manang Leti, that opened my eyes to the realities and challenges besetting our country's agricultural sector. Looking back, it was perhaps the exposure that and growing awareness that I would influence me later to pursue farming, and I only have Manang Leti to thank for that. To our children, Ranjit, Chanda, and Laila, and the entire Ramos and Shahani families, we share in your profound grief, but also join you in celebration of the meaningful life she led. She touched in her invaluable service to our country and people. And lastly, I just want to share this with President Ramos. There was a time in '94 that President Ramos asked me to run for the Senate under the Lakas. But after a few months, there was a merger of Lakas Laban. From the 12 that were chosen, of course, President Ramos had to remove 6 to make way for the Laban ticket. I think quite a few people are nodding their heads here. So we were already starting to campaign, but I was not sure that I would be taken in. So Manang Leti mentioned to me when I saw her in her house one evening. That was the first time actually I saw her. And she said, do you really want to run? I said, I've been already asked by the president, but now I have to give way. You write to my brother that it's all right, that he will drop you if he had to. And I wrote it. Dear Mr. President, it's all right if you don't put me in. Di naman tayo abogado dyan, no? But I will still support your government. So that was the thing, the tipping point wherein I think she gave this note to Manong Jo de Venecia, and Manong Jo de Venecia gave it to the president, and the Pangasinan Mafia started moving around. So that was the first break I had to run for the Senate. Thank you, good afternoon.
The Honorable Paulo Benigno Bam Aquino IV will now deliver his eulogy.
President Ramos, President Estrada, Senate President Pimentel, all the former Senate Presidents here, my colleagues, former and current members of the Senate, distinguished colleagues, of course, the members of the Ramos and Shahani families, mga kaibigan, mga kababayan, magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Before anything else, I would like to extend my sincerest condolences to the loved ones of former Senator Leticia Ramos Shahani. The country has lost another brilliant and emphatic legislator, public servant, and advocate. Today, the Senate of the Philippines and everyone gathered here mourns the passing of an esteemed Filipina who served the Philippines as a diplomat, a lawmaker, and an educator. I am deeply humbled to be speaking before you today as we remember her legacy and embed her ideals within our hearts. My first memory of Tita Leti was back in 1987 when a 9-year-old Bam Aquino joined the campaign for the Lakas ng Bayan slate, many of whom are still here. Who could forget her catchy jingle? I would say one of the most famous and best political jingles ever. Sha sha sha, si Leti Ramos siya. Who could forget that jingle? I think it's embedded in all of our minds until today. I may not have known it then, but today, more than ever, we realize the significance of electing a true advocate for women's rights and gender equality into the Philippine Congress. Even before she served as a senator, Leti Ramos Shahani was already a champion for women in the Philippines and all around the world, serving as Assistant Secretary General for Social Development and Humanitarian Affairs in the United Nations from 1981 to 1986. She was co-author of the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and was given the chairmanship of the UN Commission on Women and the National Commission on the Role of Filipino Women in 1987. Thankfully, she took her zeal from the United Nations into the Senate of the Philippines, where she passed legislation that, in her words, contributed much to raising the status of women in our country. In her 2 terms serving as a senator, she authored, among others, the Anti-Rape Law of 1997 and what is known as the Shahani Law, which strengthens the fight against gender discrimination, among others. And more than just exhaustive pieces of paper signed by our country's leaders, these laws have made a real and palpable impact on the lives of Filipinas and, in fact, every Filipino. Just last year, our country ranked as the world's 7th most gender-equal society, number 1 in Asia, according to the World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap Report. A great achievement for our country, and I'm certain, thanks in part to the contributions of the fierce women's advocate, who is Tita Leti. And though there is still a lot of work to be done to rid our country of discrimination and to truly achieve social equity among Filipinos, I am grateful for the foundation laid down by Tita Leti. Many regard the 8th and 9th Congresses spanning the late 80s to early 90s as a bright spot in Philippine legislation. Personally, members of this batch, many of whom are here today, serve as my personal heroes. For many of us who have come after this esteemed batch of senators, we feel deep gratitude for many of them because they charted the course that many of us are leading today. May Tita Leti's achievements, her excellence, and her grace inspire and encourage more Filipinos to break through glass ceilings and push our country forward to achieve equality for all. Paalam po, Tita Leti, it was an honor to campaign for you in 1987, and it is a distinct honor and privilege to pay tribute to you today. Maraming salamat, Senador Leti Ramos Shahani. Maraming salamat po.
The Honorable Alan Peter Compañero S. Cayetano will now deliver his eulogy.
Shahani Ramos family, lubusan po kaming nakikiramay. President Ramos, President Estrada, our former Senate Presidents, marami po kayo masyado, hindi ko nababanggitin isa-isa. the Bible or all holy books tell us that we were created in God's image. And like a stack of or deck of cards, we do not know what we are given. Some are given royal straight flushes, some are given 4 aces, some are given nothing but cards to bluff. Senator or Tita Leti was given quite a good deck of cards, came from a wonderful family. And I know how hard it is to follow in your father's footsteps, to have a brother that excels. And some use this advantage unwisely and just says, life is good and I'll enjoy life. But Tita Leti never took that attitude. She always took the attitude that whatever was given to her gave her more responsibility and drove her to make this a better world for everyone, especially for those who had softer voices. She decided to work hard. She decided to listen a lot. She decided to study more and more. Anyone who knows her personally, hindi lang po yung mga nagsalita dito, will gladly give her all the right adverbs or descriptive words or anything we want to say, statesperson, champion of women, ultimate diplomat, kahit ano pong tribute na ibigay natin sa salitang yon, it will fit her at bagay sa kanya because sa kanya talaga yon. Honor and excellence are 2 words that have gone in her life, in her work, and in her dealing with people. Alam po natin at nasabi na po, di ba, that she's a champion of women's rights, that she's very moving in the Senate, getting the Senate to pass many legislations that were stuck for years or sometimes decades. But what struck me most from her is the balance of her passion, of her caring versus her personality. What do I mean by that? Tita Leti was the kind of person who could tell you in the face na mali ka, but you wouldn't be hearing from her na mali ka. You would be hearing from her, mahal kita. Like a mother or an older sister, she could rebuke while at the same time telling you, this is the right thing to do. So even in her travels to heaven today, she unites the yellow tards and Dutertards because she saw the talent advantage and the contributions of both the people that sometimes we describe by colors. But she saw that as Filipinos, we have no choice. Regardless of why we are distinct or different, we have to work together. And she didn't get tired of texting people, emailing people. She didn't even call her assistant. She would sit beside you and say, ano nga ba email mo? And I remember that distinctly because the first time the president said independent foreign policy, I guess like everyone else in the room, parang ano yon, or what does he mean by that, or because the president likes to throw out terms, ano yon. But Tita Leti just patiently looked for me in the crowd, came up and said, Alan, di ba foreign relations chair ka? Oh, I have an article, ha? Basahin mo ng mabuti. And the next time she saw me, I was quite embarrassed because I don't open emails. I like text or Viber, WhatsApp better, and I haven't read it yet. But Tita Leti, I've read it more than once, and I've tried to do my part with the DFA and the President regarding your ideas and your original notion of what an independent foreign policy is. You know, us politicians have a challenge or problem because we're usually really appreciated when we're already dead. The problem is that we cannot predict when we're going to go or when the Lord's going to call us. If we could, like a year or 2 years before, and people would give eulogies like this, most politicians will use that eulogy as a commercial to run for a higher office. And sometimes when we do have eulogies like this, we also embellish kasi andyan eh, di ba? At saka we remember the good, no? But I can say that Tita Leti deserves each and every word said here today and each and every word printed in her honor in the newspapers the last few days. But I really wish that she could have heard it. No offense to our president, President Ramos. We have the same problem. You and I get more of the credit than what our sisters do. I know you've done so much for the country, Mr. President, but so has your sister. Me, I think my sister has done much more for the country than I am, but since ako nasa media, sa akin nabibigay yung credit. But being here today, may I ask everyone, the family needs you not only today. I can't forget when my father's body was put under the ground. Senator Magsaysay stood beside me quietly. Then just before leaving, he hugged me and said, "Alan, you're my man." And it took me an hour before I realized that grabe ang messaging ni Senator Magsaysay. Hanggang sa libing, "Alan, you're my man." So, but it was a comfort, and I'm sure it'll be a comfort for the Shahani and Ramos family if we continue to remember her legacy, we continue her work, we continue to talk about her. And may I just leave you with these two stories, short stories that were left to us when my dad passed, when my dad went to heaven. And one was from a priest. Sabi nung pare sa isang misa, you know, when you're in the womb and you're the baby, everything's perfect in the womb. And if it's your choice, you won't go out of the womb because that is your world. And that is the best world. You're fed, you're with your mother, you're loved, you know, emotions. Ngayon, modern na, play pa ng music. But when you come out, you realize, ang liit pala ng womb. And ang laki-laki pala ng mundo. And yung potential mo sa mundo. And I could really visualize while the priest was talking. So he said, when we die, you have to think of this world as the womb. And the next world is the bigger world. So let us allow Tita Leti to leave this world and to go into the bigger world, no? To leave the womb and to be in the bigger world. And lastly was from our pastor, our very dear pastor, Doy Castillo, who looked at each one of us and said, "Pia, how long have you known your dad? Alan, how long have you known him?" So forth. They said, "Have you counted your blessings? Have all of you," sabi niya, "Alan, do you know that you've known your father 5 years more than your other brother and 10 years more than your other brother? Do you cherish that 10 years? Because if you do, show your dad that you cherish it." So for those of us who are blessed to not only have seen Tita Leti on TV, not only read about her, not only heard her speak from afar, but had personal interaction with her, let us feel blessed that we were part of her life, and let us continue to honor her life. Muli, nakikiramay po kami. Paalam at salamat po.
The Honorable Richard J. Gordon will now deliver his eulogy.
The Honorable Presidents of the Republic of the Philippines, President Ramos, President Estrada, and of course our Senate President Coco Pimentel, my fellow senators here, former speakers, former Senate Presidents, and of course the members of the family led by President Ramos himself, and of course Ranjit, Chanda, and Leela. My fellow citizens, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. We grieve here today to honor the memory of one of our distinguished ladies and leaders of our country, Leti Shahani. Pinanganak po si Leti, and I'd rather talk to the people listening out there, if this is on live stream, I hope it is, because ang halimbawa po ni Manang Leti is something that pwedeng sukatan. Because Manang Leti, kung gagamitin po natin si Shakespeare, sinasabi nga niya, age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety. Malalim ano po. Hindi ho nalanta, hindi na siraan sa kanyang paglaki at patuloy ang pagganda. And that was Leticia Shahani, born to a family of leaders, educators, civil servants. Ang challenge siya, may kuya siyang naging presidente, kuya siyang naging general, tatay niya ay foreign minister at saka naging ambassador. May napakalaking paghamon ho sa isang babae nung hindi pa uso yung pinapauso nila Loren Legarda na power to the women. And in fact, pag nakita niyo ho ang kanyang record, yung mga nakikinig ng mga bata dyan, di lang siya champion ng education, pero she earned everything. Many of us inherit our father's names or our mother's names or our family's, names. But in the case of Manang Leti, she earned it every step of the way. She challenged herself from grade school in the province, in the boonies of Pangasinan, if I may be disrespectful to the hardworking people of Pangasinan. She went on and entered the University of the Philippines in high school. Hindi po basta-basta makapasok ho dyan at napaka-competitive ng mga tao dyan. And from there on, can you imagine, she went to Wellesley. Wellesley is one of the top women universities in the world. Hindi basta-basta makakapasok din po dyan. And she excelled there. And she was not satisfied. She went on to go and take her master's degree in Colombia. Abay, isang araw po final natin yung bill dito at tananggap natin yung bill ng education. Ang sabi ko nga po doon maganda itong bill ng education, makakapasok ng mga bata, pero karamihan ng mga bata, only 68 will pass grade school, only 48 will finish high school, and only 17 will pass college. In the case of Leticia Shahani, it was a struggle all the way. One of my staff members was saying, why don't you quote Dylan Thomas? Do not go gently into the night. Rage, rage until the dying of the light. Leticia Shahani was not raging. She was working. Bawal ang sadot. Hindi po tamad. Lalong bawal ang nang-nang. Bawal ang tanga. In her case, she had to work every step of the way. And from there, was she satisfied with her master's degree? No. She went on to Paris, sa Sorbonne. Nung mga bata kami, sikat sa Sorbonne, University of Paris. Abay, doon na yun, nagre-revolusyon yung mga estudyante. And yet, Leticia Shahani, mga batang nakikinig sa TV, sa radyo, Leticia Shahani excelled. She got the highest grades in the Sorbonne. Talo yung Presidente Ramos. Abay, tingnan ninyo. Pag nakita nyo ang kanyang educational background, tuloy-tuloy po. Aba, and then she went on to enter the man's world of foreign affairs. Abay, nung araw, masiga po yung mga ambassador natin, puro lalaki. At talagang, ang hirap pagka ikaw ay babae. And yet, she went on. Became ambassador, I believe, of Germany, of Australia, and Romania. By Eastern Soviet bloc pa yun. Papasok kayo doon, isang babae kayo, siyempre, ibang tingin ng mga tao doon. Napaka panlalaki ang mundo na yan. Pero she went on into the UN. And in the UN, she became ambassador, minister, Secretary General for Human Development, International Humanitarian Development. And by the way, before I go on with her UN life, she went on in education, became dean in Lyceum, became dean in Marino, taught in UP. My goodness, what a record. Napakahirap sabayan niya, napakahirap sundan. And yet, nung maging ambassador na siya, tuloy-tuloy ang pagtaas sa UN, abay siya naging Secretary General noong 3rd Conference on Women, World Conference on Women. I believe it was in Beijing, if I'm not mistaken. What do I know? Nairobi, Kenya. Layo ho yun. Singkit ang mga tao sa Beijing doon, ibang kulay. Pero alam ko, meron siyang ginawa sa Beijing. I'm just going on memory. But let me just say that when she did that, she was making her mark not just as a Filipino, but making a statement for women all over the world. kaya namin. We can make a difference. And when she went on in her life, she became senator. It's good to be a senator, to stand up in the Senate. I can see some of our colleagues here who preceded us. Napakaganda ng reputation ng Senado ng mga panahon na yon. And to a certain extent, we here in the Senate today have to eke out our own position in our country's history. They did. Ang dami niyang ginawa mga bago. Anti-rape, defamation of women in the workplace, mga batas. Madali yung magsabi ng mga batas. Pero tuloy-tuloy yan. Yung magagandang ginawa niya yung isang magandang ginawa niya yung paborito ni President Estrada, yung dairy farm, yung Kalabaw, dairy milk production, white milk. Pero medyo partial kasi asawa niya siguro Indiano, kaya gusto niya sa India yung mga Kalabaw. And I was privileged to have joined her in the Red Cross because she would call me and say, in her voice, in her hushed tone, Dick, can you come here to my home? Kala namin kung anong pag-uusapan namin. Pagdating doon, pag-uusapan pala namin, gatas kalabaw, o gatas ng baka. Mukhang napakasimple, ano po? For a woman who came from Wellesley, came from Sorbonne, taught in the university, gatas kalabaw. But that is essentially a mother's prerogative. We all suck from our mother's milk. And we all want to make sure that her genes pass on to us. And what is the other thing that will not allow me and Kate to forget her? The fact that nung pinaalis ang base, and medyo masakit sa akin kalooban dyan, because maraming nawalang kabuhayan doon sa amin. Nung nilabas yung base conversion development law, nangambaho kami because ang dami kong binabato noon kay President Ramos. Nasa kon-kon pa lang po ako, sinasabi ko paghandaan po ang bases kung biglang alis. Maglagay po tayo ng Freeport, and I can show you the record on that. It's not a question of paternity. It's a question of reality. Pag alis ng base, anong trabaho natin? Will it be another Sangley Point na pinangakuan ng marami? And that is what we fear the most. I was raised by my father to make the future our friend. My parents never had the education that Leticia Shahani had. They were both high school graduates. And yet they taught me a lot. And when that happened, I had to go to the Senate, bring a copy of the proposal filed by Kate that never saw light. But President Marcos then patted me in the back, sige maganda yan, pero hindi pa priority yan. And I had to go to the Senate, and at that time, I had to go to people like Senator Enrile, who was one of the few who understood what the Freeport was at that time. I went to Senator Angara, a good friend. I went to many others who were there. Senator Nana Pimentel was there. Senator Maceda had questions. And I wasn't there like a vengeful man na binasag yung palayok na kakainan namin. Na mga tao ng Zambales, Pampanga, Tarlac, ay nawala ng palayok sa kanilang hapag-kakainan sa pag-alis ng trabaho nila. And who was there to help us? I remember I would kneel down there on that corner. And Leticia Shahani would sponsor the bill. And she would be asked questions of the Freeport. And I'll write down there, like I see many of our colleagues when they're being asked on interpellation, with the staff on the side, kneeling or sitting down, whispering. But I was privileged. I felt proud to be there beside a great senator. A senator who finally had the compassion and the ear to listen to a vision that would at least allow us some dignity, because we were kicking the bases out, and we were just saying we will convert them from military to commercial purposes, but there was really very scant vision inserted into it. Senator Shahani, along with Senator Rina and Angara, all listened and helped us craft that bill. And when that bill was finally signed into law, we were all there at the conference committee, tulong-tulong, sila Senator Pimentel, sila Senator Maceda, lahat na nandun noong araw. And we finally had it done. I thought I'd bring this picture. Never forgot this picture. I remember there was a big politician waiting for me in my home because that was the eve of the next election and they were trying to make me the vice president of that person. And I did not go there. I came in very late because what Senator Shahani and the people of Olongapo who lobbied for weeks to make this free port happen finally happened. And take a look at the faces. Take a look at Senator Shahani's face. It's the accomplishment, I believe, of a lifetime. It was liberation. It was a game changer in our country. A bill that would allow us to go far away into the ocean where we cannot see the shoreline anymore and to craft the future under our own steam and the efforts of our people. Senator Shahani, people of Olongapo, Zambales, Bataan, Zambales, Tarlac, Pampanga, Central Luzon, Aurora, and all the others in this country owe you a big debt. Of course, I have to mention people who knew and expounded and made it better. Senator, and really I have to say, Senator Angara improved on the bill. Can you imagine there were only 4 provisions in the Subic Bay Metropolitan Authority, in the Subic Special Economic Zone. But it also covered Clark and other Special Economic Zone all the way up to La Union and Baguio. That was the bill that was brought into that bill, within a bill, if you will, and it finally happened. So Senator Shahani, you earned every iota, every emotion, every respect that a country can give. You work quietly from childhood to adulthood, going into challenging situations. A provinciano coming from Pangasinan, going to UP, going to college abroad, going to Paris, learning a language, even teaching French, and becoming an outstanding diplomat, an outstanding senator, an outstanding Filipino. And in the end, you came back. You came back to your beloved Pangasinan. I saw you in a TV footage where you were very proud to show your carabaos producing dairy milk. Wow, I said, this lady has never really diminished her light. And so she doesn't have to rage, but I will repeat once more, age cannot wither her, and I will say can never wither her, and I speak now to the people. Age can never wither somebody like a Leticia Shahani, nor custom. Hindi siya susuko sa kostumbre na mas madaling daan. Pumasok siya sa mas mahirap na daan, which is the custom, and it will never stale her infinite variety. Thank you very much, my dear colleagues, for the privilege of honoring a great person here today. Maraming salamat po, Leticia Shahani, at magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat.
The Honorable Lauren Ligarda will now deliver her eulogy.
Mr. President, former President Fidel V. Ramos, Senate President Pimentel, and all former Senate Presidents, former President Joseph Estrada, esteemed colleagues, to the family of Manang Leti, Leela, Ranjit, Chanda. Perhaps it was not a coincidence that former Senate President Pro-Tempore Leticia Ramos Shahani passed away on Women's Month. Perhaps even until her death, she wanted to make a statement on women empowerment. Manang Leti was, after all, a true embodiment of the empowered Filipina. Even before the Philippines elected its first female president, Senator Shahani was already fighting for a niche for women in the global arena, at a time when gender equality was a dream far from reality. She had an illustrious career as a diplomat, first joining the United Nations in 1964, working at its Division of Human Rights. In 1974, she chaired the UN Commission on the Status of Women, which recommended that 1975 should be celebrated as International Women's Year. As a foremost women's rights advocate, she pushed for the institutional empowerment of women. She prepared the first draft of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW, known as the International Bill of Rights for Women, adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1979. In 1985, she served as Secretary General of the Third World Conference on Women in Nairobi, Kenya. And in 1995, she headed the Philippine delegation to China for the Fourth World Conference on Women, where the UN adopted the Beijing Platform for Action promoting gender mainstreaming as a strategy for national policy. Senator Shahani likewise championed women's rights here at home as legislator from 1987 to 1998. She authored Republic Act 6725, dubbed as a Shahani Law, which addresses gender discrimination at work. She introduced the Anti-Rape Law of 1997 and the Rape Victim Assistance and Protection Act of 1998, among others. Senator Shahani also introduced the inclusion of the mandatory 5% allocation in the budget of every government department and agency for gender and development, or the GAD law. Manang Leti was also an environmentalist. She was an educator, a culture advocate, and civil society leader. She had strong convictions about protecting our seas and our oceans and our territory, and spoke about it in many fora, including just recently, perhaps last year, at the Management Association of the Philippines, where I was present, and she talked to me about this even in private. I am glad that the Senate was able to honor the contributions to the nations of Manang Leti while she was still alive. I authored Senate Resolution number 87, honoring her achievements in 2015, which was unanimously adopted by the Senate, and she was here to receive it. Manang Leti also had to be a strong mother, raising her 3 children almost single-handedly after the death of her husband following 8 years of marriage. On a personal note, I am honored that Manang Leti somehow took a liking for me and attended all the events from my first term up to just last year that I invited her to, even to my home. I've even been, of course, to her home, to her bedroom, and seen her Abel cloth. I just didn't make it to her favorite home, which is her bamboo home in Pangasinan, where she's been inviting me to sleep over, but never got to do it. That I regret. And she often congratulated me and encouraged me in my 3 terms as senator for the work that I do, even sending me her delicious Calabao Quesong Puti, and when she would not send me, I would go to the Legazpi market to buy it from her staff. And when I had harvest, because in a sense I'm similar to her, I'm a weekend farmer, and I send my produce, which her staff would sell in their stall in the Legazpi market. So we exchanged our produce. And she would also send me, so thoughtfully, the delicious fruits from Taiwan whenever she would come from out of town. There are many things that Manang Leti and I share. Our love for bamboo, her lovely home, I'm sure the children would enjoy there, and perhaps now, even much later, I could join you in an overnight stay, which your mother used to invite me all the time. For culture, I think she's one of the authors of the if not the principal author of the NCCA bill that became law, creating the NCCA. For oceans and the seas, she was very passionate about that. And she was a stickler for protocol. I think it was Senator Rene who said, for precision and for detail. In fact, I don't know if I should say this, just a little anecdote. Once, when she was with the MECO, the Manila Economic and Cultural Office in Taiwan, and I was chair of the Foreign Relations Committee on my second term, she sought an appointment with me and even went through the process of calling me, not directly when she could have had, but she called me in the landline in my office. And somehow a staff who was quite new answered it. And instead of informing me of the appointment that former Senator Shahani wanted with me when Manang Leti could have called me directly, the staff called the PROC Embassy, the People's Republic of China Embassy, asking whether it was actually appropriate for a MECO board member to see the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. And you can imagine how angry she was when she found out about this and how angry I was, just like her. She called me. Of course, she found it very improper, and rightly so. So Manang Leti would not leave it at that. She called me, and I would never hear the end of it. And she did not mince words in telling me that I should fire that staff. I followed her, and the next day the staff was nowhere to be found. So that's not to cast aspersion at her. All I'm saying is that she knew what was right and what was correct protocol and what was incorrect. And I just followed her because she's right. So another treasured conversation with Manang Leti was when she said, soon after 1998, I think in my first or second term, that she was right in endorsing my candidacy then when I went to her home in Bel Air in 97, before I ran, and when I sought, of course, the endorsement of then President Fidel V. Ramos, who was responsible for putting me in the Lakas slate when I was interviewing him in the Rizal room in Malacanang when I was a young journalist of 37 years old. So after then President Ramos asked me to join the Lakas slate, I consulted your sister, Mr. President, and she endorsed me. And many years later, she would tell me, I didn't make a mistake, in fact, do this, do that. Then she would tell me about all the advocacies that she would do in the Senate. And she said, you're continuing where I left off. I could go on and on, but it's just too much, too many stories to tell. In her speech at the Fourth United Nations World Conference on Women in Beijing in 1995, Senator Shahani declared, "Women of the world, behold, our time has come." This is so apt. Manang Leti, your time here on earth may have come to pass, but behold, your legacy shall live forever. Thank you for your work to empower not only the Filipino women, but also the women of the world. Thank you for your untiring service. Thank you for your love, for your inspiration, for your brilliance, and for your elegance. Thank you. May you rest in peace.
The Honorable Vicente C. Soto III will now deliver his eulogy.
Great speeches are not delivered on occasions like this. For the greatest speech is being delivered right in front of us. That life is transient, but a good name lives forever. One's legacy upon death is not dependent on the eloquence of those who deliver eulogies, for it would be dangerous to rely on orators to make a verdict on how a life was lived. One's life is the best speech about oneself. Our duty is to remember that life, her life, and draw lessons from its living. Senator Shahani, Leti, did not preach humility. She simply lived humbly. She did not preach integrity. She just simply stayed away from anything unworthy. She did not preach calmness, serenity, and diplomacy. She merely showed it in her words, actions, and demeanor. From the gentleness of her voice to the fluidity of her moves. She was the Filipina who brought timeless Filipino values into modern times of women empowerment and gender sensitivity. Like the moon, sometimes unnoticed due to the light from the brother sun, Senator Leti shone in her own right. In the United Nations, she was there. In the euphoria of EDSA in the 1980s, she was picked by President Cory for her Senate team. In the crafting of our laws for women's rights and empowerment, she was there. With just about a few, I had the distinction of having been here, serving as senator together with her from the 9th to the 10th Congress. When she served as senator, we had quite a number of interesting debates together. And it was a learning experience. Senator Shahani symbolized education as the door to achieving one's full potential. From the University of the Philippines to Columbia in the United States to Sorbonne in Paris, she drank on their fountains of wisdom. Education, diplomacy, women empowerment, these are her legacies. These are our inheritance from her today. Leticia Valdez Ramos Shahani, Senator, Educator, Filipino, Bayani, paalam.
Senate Secretary Lotgardo Barbo will now read the Senate resolution.
Senate Resolution Number 44, resolution expressing the profound sympathy and sincere condolences of the Senate on the death of the Honorable Leticia Ramos Shahani, former Senator, 1987-1998, and Senate President Pro-Tempore, 1993-1996. Whereas Leticia Ramos Shahani, former Senator, and the first woman Senate President Pro-Tempore passed away on March 20, 2017 at the age of 87. Whereas born on September 30, 1929 in Lingayen, Pangasinan, to Angela Valdez, a public school teacher, and Narciso Ramos, a lawyer, who later became an assemblyman and the Foreign Affairs Secretary, who co-founded the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. She was a sister to Fidel V. Ramos, the 12th President of the Republic of the Philippines, a wife to the late writer and professor Ranjit Shahani, and a mother to 3 children, Leela, Ranjit, and Chanda. Whereas a woman of exceptional academic attainment, she earned her Bachelor of Arts in English Literature from Wellesley College in Massachusetts, USA, Master of Arts in Comparative Literature from Columbia University in New York, USA, and her Doctor of Philosophy in Comparative Literature and Sociology from the University of Paris in France as a French government scholar with her thesis meriting the highest honors. Whereas a distinguished educator, she taught a wide array of courses such as English literature, French, Spanish, comparative literature, Humanities, and Social Psychology, and served as a faculty member of the University of the Philippines as Dean of the College of International Humanitarian and Development Studies of Miriam College, and also as Dean of the Graduate School of the Lyceum of the Philippines. Whereas a notable personality in the international arena, she held various positions in the Philippine Foreign Service, remarkably as the first woman ambassador to the Socialist Republic of Romania and to the Commonwealth of Australia. In the United Nations as the chairperson of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, as Assistant Secretary General for Social Development and Humanitarian Affairs, as Secretary General of the 7th Congress on Crime Prevention and Treatment of Offenders in Milan, Italy, and of the 3rd World Conference on Women in Nairobi in Kenya, and after the 1986 People Power Revolution, she was appointed Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of the Philippines. Whereas an esteemed senator, she held various key positions in the Senate, such as chairperson of the Committees on Social Justice, Welfare and Development, Women and Family Relations, Agriculture, Foreign Relations and Education, Culture and Arts, as member of the Commission on Appointments, and as Senate President Pro-Tempore, the first woman to be elected thereto. Whereas an accomplished lawmaker, she was instrumental in the enactment of quality legislative measures that gave emphasis on education, economics, and natural resources and environmental protection, foremost of which are RA 7356, which created the National Commission for Culture and Arts, RA 7227, otherwise known as the Basis Conversion and Development Act, RA 7157, otherwise known as the Philippine Foreign Service Act of 1991, RA 6725, which strengthens the prohibition of discrimination against women in the workplace, RA 8505, otherwise known as the Rape Victim Assistance and Protection Act of 1998, RA 8550, otherwise known as the Philippine Fisheries Code of 1998, and RA 6977, otherwise known as the Magna Carta for Small Enterprises. She was likewise credited for initiating and advocating for the Moral Recovery Program aimed at integrating ethical values into nation building and governance. Whereas a women's rights advocate in the Senate, she successfully introduced the mandatory 5% allocation in the annual General Appropriations Act for gender-responsive projects in accordance with RA 7192, otherwise known as the Women in Development and Nation Building Act. Whereas an unrelenting public servant, after her tenure in the government, she continued campaigning for the upliftment of the people, such as establishing the Shahani Gatas ng Calabao Products Incorporated, a dairy processing and marketing entity for pasteurization and packaging of fresh Carabao's milk, and Quezong Puti in Pangasinan, providing much-needed extra income for farmers in the locality as well as in the neighboring local government units. Whereas her passing is a great loss, not only to her bereaved family and loved ones, but also to the entire Filipino nation. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Senate to express, as it hereby expresses, its profound sympathy and sincere condolences on the death of the Honorable Leticia Ramos Shahani, former Senator, 1987-1998, and Senate President Pro-Tempore, 1993-1996. Resolved further that a copy of this resolution be furnished to the bereaved family of former Senator Leticia Ramos Shahani, adopted, signed Aquilino Coco Pimentel III, President of the Senate, signed Gerardo B. Barbo, Secretary of the Senate.
The Senate President, together with the incumbent senators, will now present the resolution to the Shahani family. The Honorable Senate President Aquilino Coco Pimentel III will now deliver his eulogy.
To the Ramos Shahani families, former President Ramos, former President Estrada, former Senate presidents, former senators, and my colleagues at the moment, and fellow Filipinos, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. And I never had the honor to serve in the Senate with Senator Leticia Ramos Shahani. But from what I have learned of her from those who knew her personally, one of whom is my father, who worked with her, I can only say that the Senate was blessed by her selfless and dedicated presence in our institution as a lawmaker for 2 terms. When we speak of heroes, we think of brave souls who have taken up arms against the enemies of our country, or those who directly supported our compatriots who clashed with foreign invaders. The woman we honor today never bore arms against foreign invaders, nor tended to the wounds of those who did. But she did relentlessly fight for the interests of our newly independent nation as the first female ambassador to Romania, as our ambassador to the Commonwealth of Australia, and as Deputy Foreign Minister under President Corazon Aquino. She fought for the welfare of women and the disadvantaged in the halls of the United Nations, as chairperson of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, as Assistant Secretary General for Social Development and Humanitarian Affairs, as Secretary General of the 7th Congress on Crime Prevention and Treatment of Offenders, and in the 3rd World Conference on Women. As Senator, she fought for the country's foreign policy interests, for the welfare of women, for the preservation of our culture and the arts, for our farmers and fisher folks, for small businessmen, for victims of rape and discrimination, and for moral governance through her advocacies and the laws she passed and she helped pass. Even when not in government service, she fought for the interests of the country, fighting ignorance in her distinguished career as an educator in the University of the Philippines, Miriam College, and the Lyceum of the Philippines. She was an unrelenting public servant, even as a member of the private sector. She continued campaigning for the upliftment of people, such as when she established the Shahani Gatas ng Kalabaw Products Incorporated, providing much-needed extra income for farmers in Pangasinan and in the neighboring provinces. In her many careers, there are very few people who were not positively affected by the causes she advocated. So even people born long after her passing would continue to benefit from the fruits of her labor. And in her, we also find a shining example of morality in governance. Despite being a member of the Foreign Service in the Marcos government, she did not hesitate to resign and support another hero, Corazon Aquino, when the latter challenged the dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos. It was not an easy decision to make during those times. Heroes are not just found in the bloody fields of battle. They can be found wherever someone decides to do what is right and to fight for what is right, even when it does not bring her any personal benefit. They can be found wherever someone decides that the welfare of others is just as important as her welfare. Senator Shahani's list of achievements outshines those of most men. Yet she did all these things at a time when the glass ceiling was very real for women, making her achievements all the more remarkable. But for me, what made Senator Shahani even greater was that through her laws protecting women from discrimination and her work in the United Nations, she made sure that other women are empowered to follow in her footsteps. This is why Senator Leticia Ramos Shahani is a hero. It is a source of pride for me that she chose the Senate as a venue to advance her advocacies. Our beloved institution is enriched by her presence in its chamber. On behalf, therefore, of the Senate, allow me to place into the records of our chamber our individual and collective thanks to the Honorable Senator Leticia Ramos Shahani, the first female Senate President Pro-Tempore, for her contributions to the enhancement of our foreign policy, the strengthening of the rule of law, human rights, justice, moral governance, and the development of the youth of the land. As we lay her to rest, after a life truly well lived, let me say, thank you, Senator Shahani. We will continue your causes from this point on. Maraming salamat po.
On behalf of the family of the late Senator Leticia Ramos Shahani, Ms. Leila R. Shahani will deliver the response.
Former President Ramos, our beloved Uncle Eddie, former President Estrada, Senate President Coco Pimentel, Uncle Sonny Belmonte, honorable members of the Senate, distinguished guests, dearest friends, beloved family. On behalf of my brothers Ranjit and Chanda, I would like to express my deepest appreciation for the tributes we heard about my mother today. Nakakataba po ng puso. Marami pong salamat. Leti Ramos Shahani held the Senate in the highest esteem as a key institution in the governing of the country, as a nation of laws dedicated to fostering justice and freedom, not only for a privileged few, but for each and every single one of its citizens. For Mom, lawmaking was a protracted and deliberative process that required negotiation and coalition building, rather than threats of losing committee posts or reckless impeachment threats. The law for my mom was meant to protect the weak and the marginalized, as well as check the abuses of the rich and powerful. She believed that legislation was a means to further democracy, not a cudgel for beating the poor and terrorizing the weak. For these reasons, Mom put forth such bills as the rape law, which radically altered the definition of rape from a crime against chastity to one against persons. She pushed for laws that would protect our maritime resources against foreign expropriation and safeguard our natural resources from wanton exploitation. My mom, as many of you already know, was an untiring champion of women's rights, seeking to protect women from domestic violence and promote reproductive health. She had a clear and unwavering vision that women's rights were integral to human rights, that human rights is indissociable from national development, and that national development, to be truly just, must be founded on international norms and coordinated with international governance. For this reason, sovereignty for my mother never meant the right to do what you alone determined to be right, free from the criticism of others. Sovereignty, to Mommy, was about self-determination, but always in concert and in sympathy with the rights of those who often could not claim their rights, with those who we used to call, in other words, the wretched of the earth. It is for this reason that one of my mom's most memorable programs was her campaign for moral recovery. Like Rizal and Mabini, she believed to her dying day that a far better way to address social ills like corruption and crime lay in the education of the soul rather than in the incarceration and execution of the body. And that such moral education could best be achieved by the studious attention backed by generous funding to the indigenous arts and the native genius of the Filipino people in all of their diversity. In sum, for my mom, diplomacy, culture, and moral education were always preferable to partisan confrontation and violent outbursts. It has been truly gratifying to listen to the generous remarks of all of this august body. I know that she held each and every one of you in the highest regard and the deepest of affection. With Senator Jun Magsaysay, She shared a fondness for dairy farming, although she did not always agree with the use of cows over carabaos. Yeah. Senator Nene Pimentel was a partner in many a legislative battle, including the framing of the local government code in the wake of the authoritarian centralization that was to characterize martial law. Among her senatorial peers, Mom always had a special place in her heart for Senator Rene Sagisag, who she regarded as a beacon of moral integrity and unfailing support. Among some of the current crop of senators, we would like to think that my mom's legacy continues to live on. My mom was always terribly fond of Senator Alan Peter Cayetano, and his Ate Pia, who always championed some of her enduring concerns on reproductive health and women's rights. Senator Bam Aquino, Mom always felt, was one of the rising stars of his generation, and by all indications, he is quickly living up to his promise. And Senator Dick Gordon was very dear to my mom's heart too. Mom often remarked on his impressive work in the Freeport Plan in Subic. And Senator Lauren Lagarda, my mother always cherished her friendship with you in particular. Your unflagging pursuit of vernacular cultural distinction and national cultural excellence were in some ways preceded by my mom's work founding the NCCA and promoting indigenous arts, but she held you very close to her heart. Lastly, we greatly appreciate the kind words of Senator Tito Soto. Despite their disagreements on a range of issues, particularly on the RH bill, sir, Mom always remained very fond of you, and she maintained civil throughout. In fact, my mother never really had any enemies, a remarkable feat for anyone in politics today, and tended to bring together opposing factions from across the political spectrum. Her career, as epic as it was stellar, is proof that politics need not be constant war by other means. It could also be about cooperation and coalition, empathy, and, dare I say, love. In a time of great expectations and even greater uncertainties, both in the country and around the world, I would like to think that my mom, El Mamio, I would call her, did her best and left the world a much better place than when she had first entered it. May her memory continue to inspire us all, and may her legacy serve as a lodestar in our collective pursuit for all that is good and all that is right. Thank you. Maraming salamat po.
This necrological service is hereby declared closed.
Reception will be at the Recto, Laurel, and Pexon rooms, and departure honors will be at 4:55 in front of the Senate building.
show me the way. Show the way to live inside your heart. Lead me, Lord, all my life. You are my Lord. You're the lamp upon my feet. All the time, my Lord, I need you there. You are my life. I cannot live alone. Let me stay by your guiding love all through my life. Lead me, Lord. Lead me, Lord. Walk by me, even though at last I'd rather go along my way. Then we take the right direction, take your road. Lead me, Lord, and never leave my side. All my days, all my life. You are my Lord. You're the lamp upon my feet. All the time, my Lord, I need you there. You are my life. I cannot live alone. Let
Talagang 4:30 na tayo.